5-year-old prince locked his teeth into her sleeve. One drop of blood could mean her execution, but instead of begging for mercy, the lowly Omega smiled at the most powerful Alpha King in the realm and said, "Careful, little wolf." He bite back. In a world where Omegas don't speak to kings, where a feral heir hasn't said a word in 3 years, and where one wrong move could start a war, this fearless archivist was about to shatter every rule and prove that the fiercest protector doesn't always wear a crown. If this story reminded you that real strength isn't always loud, hit that like button and subscribe for more powerful tales that challenge everything you thought you knew. Get him off her. Now. Beta Thorn's voice cut through the mahogany boardroom like a blade. The Alpha King's heir, 5-year-old Leo, had his teeth locked onto the fraying wool of the Omega's sleeve. Around them, the High Council went still. A single drop of blood could mean an execution, an Omega harming the royal cub. Even in self-defense, could mean war. King Cassian rose to his feet, a low rumble building in his chest, his golden eyes fixed on the girl. But Luna didn't scream. She didn't flinch. Instead, she met the Alpha King's gaze, let out a soft laugh, and gently pulled her sleeve back. "Careful, little wolf," she said, her voice calm and steady. He bite back. The silence that followed was crushing. In the heart of the obsidian spire, the ruling seat of the Northern Pax, Omegas did not speak to the Alpha King. They didn't smile at his feral, unmanageable air, and they certainly didn't issue playful threats. No matter how gently spoken, Cassian's boots struck the marble floor with the heavy, deliberate sound of a predator moving in. He was a man built from stone and duty. His face a mask of authority that had held fractured territories together for a decade. The air grew thick. The sharp scent of ozone and pine filled the room as his pheromones spiked with protective rage. Luna remained, kneeling on the plush carpet. She'd been summoned only to deliver the historical archives for the border dispute, a task suited to her rank. Hair worn, oversized gray sweater swallowed her small frame, a sharp contrast to the tailored silk and armored leather worn by the council members towering above her. Leo still had a fistful of her sweater. His teeth hovered dangerously close to the fragile skin of her wrist. The boy hadn't spoken a word since the ambush that took his mother 3 years ago. He communicated only in snarls, beats, and shattered glass. "Release her." "Leo," Cassian commanded. His voice was a weight that pressed down on the room, forcing 2 nearby Alpha Lords to avert their eyes and bare their necks. The cub only tightened his jaw. A low growl tore from his small throat. His wide, terrified eyes flicked from his massive father to the council members surrounding him, men who looked at him not with love, but with pity and fear. Luna didn't look at the king. She kept her focus entirely on the trembling child clinging to her arm. The scent rolling off the boy wasn't aggression. It was pure terror. He was drowning in a sea of aggressive alpha pheromones, suffocating under the weight of his own lineage. "It's all right, Your Majesty," Luna said quietly, her voice cutting through the tension. She didn't bow her head. She didn't shake. Beta Thorn stepped forward, his hand resting on the hilt of his dagger. "Silence. Omega, do not address the king." Luna ignored him. She shifted her weight slowly, ignoring the sharp pull on her sleeve. With her free hand, she reached into the deep pocket of her wool skirt. Several councilmen flinched, bracing for a weapon. Instead, she pulled out a small, slightly bruised apple. "You know," Luna whispered to the boy, ignoring the dozen lethal predators around them. Wool tastes terrible. It gets stuck in your teeth and makes your tongue itch. Leo's growl faltered. His amber eyes, identical to his father's, snapped to the apple. I was saving this for my break. Luna continued, her tone easy, as if she were talking to an ordinary child on a playground. But if you're that hungry, we can trade. Sleeve for the apple. Fair deal. Cassian watched, caught between fury and fascination. No one spoke to Leo like that. The royal handlers treated him like a ticking bomb. The tutors treated him like a broken machine. For 3 agonizing seconds, the boardroom held its breath. Then, slowly, the cub's jaw went slack. He released the damp wool of Luna's sleeve, but he didn't take the apple. Instead, he lunged forward and buried his face into the curve of Luna's neck, wrapping his small arms around her shoulders in a desperate, clinging embrace. A collective gasp echoed through the chamber. Cassian's heart slammed against his ribs. His son, who hadn't allowed a touch from anyone, even Cassian himself, in nearly 6 months, was clinging to a low-ranking archivist. Luna's breath hitched, but her hands moved on instinct, wrapping around the boy's small, shaking back. She met Cassian's gaze then. Her eyes were a striking clear silver devoid of the submissive haze he was so used to seeing in her kind. Meeting adjourned. Cassian said, his voice rough and low. He didn't look away from the Omega. Clear the room. The long walk to the royal wing was quiet. The heavy oak doors of the boardroom had shut behind them, leaving only the king, the Omega, and the silent child clinging to her chest. Cassian walked half a step behind Luna, his sharp gaze tracking every subtle movement she made. The halls of the obsidian spire were built to intimidate soaring arches, tapestries woven with blood and conquest, and the lingering scent of dominance. It was a place designed to make an Omega feel small. Yet Luna walked with steady, measured grace. She didn't shrink against the walls. She simply carried his son. He's heavy, Cassian finally said, the words echoing awkwardly down the corridor. He hated how unsure he sounded. He was a tactician who could command armies with a whisper. But he couldn't comfort his own child. He's carrying a lot of weight, Luna replied quietly, adjusting her grip on Leo. The boy had buried his nose into her collarbone, breathing in the scent of lavender and old paper that clung to her. It makes a person heavier. Cassian's jaw tightened. He wasn't used to metaphors. He was used to reports and casualty counts. He doesn't usually attach himself. He was overwhelmed. Luna said, her tone matter of fact. 14 alphas in a closed room, all posturing, all projecting their sense to establish dominance. To a cub with heightened senses and no secondary presentation to protect him, it's like standing in the middle of a screaming crowd with no way to cover his ears. Cassian stopped. Luna paused a few feet ahead, turning to look back at him. You speak as though you understand alpha physiology better than the royal physicians, Cassian said, his eyes narrowing. There was no accusation in his tone, only curiosity. I read, Your Majesty, I spend 10 hours a day in the archives. I know the history of the bloodlines, the biology of the secondary genders, the treaties of the old wars. She gave a small, self-deprecating smile. It's either that or dusting the shelves. I prefer reading. They reached the heavy, reinforced doors of the royal nursery. 2 elite guards snapped to attention, their eyes widening as they registered the Omega carrying the prince. Cassian silenced them with a sharp wave of his hand. Inside, the nursery was a gilded cage. Every corner was padded, every toy carefully chosen for safety. It was sterile. beautiful, and utterly devoid of warmth. Luna stepped inside, and Cassian watched as she carefully lowered Leo to his feet. But the moment her hands left his shoulders, the boy panicked. He let out a sharp, distressed sound and grabbed the hem of her sweater in a white-knuckled grip. Cassian felt a pang of jealousy, hot and bitter. His wolf bristled, demanding he step forward, take his son, and dismiss the interloper. But the memory of Leo's violent thrashing earlier that morning held him back. Luna didn't pry the boy's fingers away. Instead, she sank to the floor, crossing her legs on the plush rug. She was eye level with the cub now. "Okay," Luna said softly. "I'm not going anywhere. We can sit right here." Cassian stood in the doorway, a shadow against the light. "I can compensate you for your time, Miss Luna," she provided. She didn't look up at him. Her attention focused on the boy, slowly relaxing his grip. "And I don't need compensation, Your Majesty. He's just a frightened child. Comfort shouldn't be a transactional affair." The quiet reprimand hit Cassian like a physical blow. He stared at the back of her head, the messy braid of dark hair spilling over her shoulder. For the first time in 3 years, the stifling cold of the spire felt like it was cracking. By morning, the rumors had spread through the obsidian spire like wildfire. An Omega, a lowly archivist, had not only touched the royal heir, but was currently sleeping on a velvet chaise in the corner of his nursery because the prince refused to let her leave. Cassian had barely slept. He'd spent the night in the adjoining study. The door cracked open. Listening to the soft, rhythmic breathing of the girl and the quiet slumber of his son. Leo hadn't woken up screaming once. It was a miracle that Cassian found terrifying. At exactly 8 in the morning, the heavy doors of the royal suite swung open. Lady Serafina strode in, bringing with her a wave of heavy rose perfume and sharp ambition. She was the daughter of the southern warlord, an alpha female of impeccable breeding, and the council's favored choice to become Cassian's new queen. "Cassian, darling, what is this madness I hear?" Serafina's voice was smooth, though her eyes were sharp as broken glass. She didn't wait for permission to enter his private sanctuary. Cassian looked up from his desk, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Lower your voice, Serafina. Leo is still sleeping." Serafina paused, her gaze drifting toward the open nursery door. She stepped toward it, heels clicking against the marble. Cassian moved instantly, intercepting her before she could cross the threshold. "I said," Cassian rumbled, his voice dropping into the commanding register of the Alpha King. "He is sleeping." Serafina's lips thinned, but she quickly masked her annoyance with a sympathetic smile. "Of course, I'm only concerned. The council is in an uproar. An Omega from the dusty archives playing nursemaid. It's completely inappropriate." She calmed a situation that Beta Thorn was about to escalate with drawn steel. Cassian replied coldly, "She is an Omega." "Cassian," Serafina hissed, leaning closer, lowering her voice so the guards outside wouldn't hear. "They are biologically subservient. They are weak. Having one so close to the heir makes him look weak. I have brought a certified alpha governess from my estate. She is waiting in the hall." Before Cassian could reply, a soft rustle came from the nursery. Luna appeared in the doorway. She looked exhausted, her sweater crumpled. Her hair slightly messy, but her silver eyes were bright. And she held herself with that same inexplicable dignity. Serafina turned, her nose wrinkling in open disgust as the faint scent of lavender reached her. "You, return to the lower levels immediately." Your presence here is an insult to the royal household. Luna didn't flinch. She looked at Serafina. Then to Cassian. The prince is waking up. He's asking for water. Did you not hear me? Serafina snapped. Her alpha pheromones flaring in a heavy, suffocating wave designed to force the Omega to her knees. Luna's shoulders stiffened. Her face paled slightly under the assault. But her knees locked. She didn't drop. She simply gripped the doorframe and took a slow, deep breath. I heard you, milady, but my orders come from the king. Hello. Feral growl echoed from inside the nursery. It wasn't directed at Luna. Small, bare feet padded across the floor. And Leo appeared, grabbing a fistful of Luna's skirt and glaring at Serafina. He bared his small teeth in warning. Serafina recoiled, genuine shock registering on her face. Cassian, this is unacceptable. The boy is acting like a feral beast protecting a... Enough. Cassian's voice shattered the tension in the room. He stepped past Serafina, placing his massive frame between the noblewoman and the Omega. He looked down at Luna. She was trembling slightly from the exertion of fighting off Serafina's pheromones. But she held her ground, a protective hand resting lightly on his son's head. Miss Luna, Cassian said, his voice carrying the weight of a royal decree. Yes, Your Majesty, you are formally relieved of your duties in the archives. Cassian turned his head slightly, locking his golden eyes onto Serafina's pale face, effective immediately. You are the royal caretaker of the heir. You answer to no one in this spire save for me. Serafina gasped, her ambition momentarily eclipsed by outrage. Luna blinked, the first crack of surprise showing on her face. She looked at the towering Alpha King, then down at the little boy clinging to her skirt. Slowly, that same soft, disarming smile touched her lips. I'll need a new sweater. Your Majesty, this one has a hole in it. Cassian stood in the cavernous belly of the obsidian spire. The grand archives were a labyrinth of towering mahogany shelves, smelling of decaying vellum, dry ink, and centuries of forgotten history. Dust motes danced in the sparse shafts of sunlight that pierced the high, narrow windows. He wasn't here to read. He was here for answers. She was never just dusting. Your Majesty, said Silas, the elderly Beta who served as the head archivist. The old man shuffled toward a secluded desk tucked into a shadowy corner. It was cluttered with towering stacks of leather-bound tomes, loose parchment, and dozens of meticulous charcoal sketches. Cassian picked up a piece of parchment. It wasn't written in the common tongue, but in High Lycan, a dead language that even the most educated Alpha Lords struggled to decipher. She has an unnatural affinity for linguistic translation and scent memory. Silas continued, adjusting his spectacles. She was piecing together the old texts regarding the feral degradation of Alpha heirs, the psychological toll of the presentation years. I tried to warn her it was above her station, but she's relentlessly curious. Cassian's eyes dragged across the elegant, sweeping handwriting on the page. Luna hadn't just been reading at random. She was actively trying to understand the sickness that had claimed so many royal cubs throughout history, the very same feral isolation that had been gripping Leo. Did she find a cure? Cassian murmured, his voice swallowed by the endless rows of books. Not a cure. Sire, a method. Silas corrected gently. She hypothesized that an alpha cub's aggression is fundamentally rooted in sensory overload and an inability to communicate complex emotional pain before their vocal cords mature into their secondary gender. She believed they needed a conduit, a grounding wire. Cassian lowered the parchment. a knot of admiration and suspicion tightening in his chest. He left the archives and climbed the spiral stone staircase back up to the royal wing. He moved silently, a predator in his own domain. When he reached the antechamber of the nursery, the heavy oak door was slightly ajar. Cassian paused, peering through the crack. The plush rug had been pushed aside to expose the smooth, cool marble floor. Luna sat cross-legged, wearing a simple, soft cotton dress, the color of oatmeal. She had flatly refused the silken finery the royal tailors had tried to force on her. Leo was sitting opposite her. Between them lay a massive sheet of blank parchment and several sticks of colored charcoal. Cassian watched, utterly captivated. Luna wasn't speaking. She drew a sharp, jagged line in red charcoal on the paper, then tapped her chest with a questioning look. Leo stared at it. After a long pause, the little prince reached out, took a black stick of charcoal, and aggressively scribbled over the red line, turning it into a chaotic, dark storm. Luna nodded slowly, as if she completely understood. She took a blue stick and drew a circle around the black storm, enclosing it, containing it. Then, she gently touched the back of Leo's hand. The boy exhaled a long, shaky breath that seemed to deflate the tension in his small shoulders. He didn't bite. He didn't growl. He simply leaned forward and rested his forehead against Luna's knee. Cassian's breath caught. He had spent the last 3 years bringing the greatest healers, the most powerful alphas, and the strictest disciplinarians to his son. They had all failed. An Omega with a piece of charcoal and boundless patience was succeeding where a kingdom had faltered. He pushed the door open completely. Luna looked up, her silver eyes catching the sunlight pouring through the tall windows. She didn't scramble to her feet or offer a submissive bow. She simply smiled, a soft, welcoming thing that made the king's wolf pace restlessly beneath his skin. "He's angry," Luna whispered, her voice barely carrying across the room. "But he knows he's safe enough to show it now." Cassian walked over and slowly lowered his massive frame onto the marble floor beside them. It was deeply undignified for the Alpha King. But as he sat there, he felt a strange, unfamiliar peace settle over the room. 3 days later, the air of the spire felt suffocating, and Luna requested permission to take the prince into the glass atrium. Cassian agreed, though he insisted on accompanying them. Shadowed by 2 of his elite royal guards, the atrium was a masterpiece of northern architecture, a massive, vaulted greenhouse filled with exotic flora, sprawling ancient oaks, and a winding stream. Sunlight fractured through the glass panes, casting a warm, dappled glow over the cobblestone paths. For the first time, Leo was walking freely, not clinging to Luna's skirt. Though he never strayed more than a few feet away, Luna watched the boy chase a pale blue butterfly near a thicket of thorn roses. She breathed in the humid, sweet air, letting her guard down for just a fraction of a second. That was her mistake. Her heightened senses, a trait unique to Omegas, meant for nurturing and detecting illness, caught the shift before the guards did. Beneath the overwhelming scent of blooming jasmine and wet earth, there was a sudden, sharp spike of sour, metallic fear. It wasn't Cassian. It wasn't Leo. It was the new guard, standing by the southern archway. Luna's silver eyes snapped toward him. The man's posture was rigid, his pupils dilated. He had masked his scent with a chemical neutralizer, a tactic used by sleeper agents and assassins. As the guard's hand dropped to the hilt of a concealed, serrated blade, Luna moved. "Leo, down," she screamed. A sound so loud and commanding it shattered the tranquility of the atrium. She didn't run away. She launched herself forward. The assassin lunged, moving with the terrifying, blurred speed of a fully presented alpha. His blade aimed directly at the young prince's back. Luna slammed into Leo, shoving his small body deep into the dense, scratching safety of the thorn rose bushes. The assassin's blade swung downward, missing the child, but catching the back of Luna's shoulder as she shielded the bush. Fabrictor. Hot, bright pain flared across her skin, but she didn't release her protective crouch over the thorny thicket. A roar shook the glass ceiling. It wasn't the shout of a king. It was the apocalyptic, feral sound of an apex predator whose pack had been threatened. Cassian crossed the courtyard in a single, devastating leap. He didn't use a weapon. His bare hands locked onto the assassin's armor, hoisting the man entirely off the ground. The sickening crunch of bone echoed through the greenhouse as Cassian threw the assailant against a stone pillar with enough force to shatter the granite. The assassin crumpled, incapacitated, and bleeding out instantly. The remaining guards drew their weapons, forming a defensive perimeter. But they dared not approach their king. Cassian was lost in the red haze of the blood frenzy. His chest heaved violently, his claws fully extended, tearing gouges into the cobblestones. His golden eyes were blown out, reduced to pure, terrifying rings of amber. The pheromones rolling off him were suffocating, a crushing pressure that forced the nearby guards to their knees, gasping for air. He was a monster, unleashed, pacing wildly around the neutralized threat, searching for anything else to destroy. Papa. The tiny, terrified whimper came from the bushes. Leo was crying. Cassian snapped his head toward the sound, a deep growl rumbling in his throat. Unable to differentiate friend from foe, he took a heavy, threatening step toward the thorn roses. Cassian. The name was spoken softly, yet it cut through the oppressive air like a silver bell. Luna pulled herself up from the dirt. Her left sleeve was stained with a growing patch of crimson, but her posture was entirely relaxed. She stepped directly into the Alpha's path, placing herself between the feral king and his terrified son. The guards shouted warnings, begging the Omega to step back. But Luna ignored them. She walked right up to the hulking, enraged predator. He towered over her, chest heaving, a lethal growl vibrating against her skin. She didn't bare her neck. She didn't submit. She raised her uninjured right hand and pressed her palm flat against the center of his chest, right over his racing heart. "It's over," she whispered, looking up into his terrifying, blown-out eyes. "We're safe. You kept us safe. You can come back now." For a heart-stopping moment, Cassian bared his teeth at her, his wolf screaming to assert dominance, but Luna held his gaze, her thumb gently stroking the warm fabric over his chest. Slowly, the crushing weight of his pheromones began to dissipate. The gold in his eyes receded, returning to their sharp, intelligent state. He looked down at the blood blooming on her shoulder, and a different kind of agony fractured his expression. The Spire's infirmary was tense. The royal physician, a trembling beta, had just finished wrapping crisp, white bandages around Luna's shoulder. It was a shallow laceration, but the sheer amount of blood had painted a grim picture. Through it all, Cassian hadn't moved from the corner of the room. He stood like a gargoyle carved from shadow, watching her with an intensity that made Luna's skin prickle. Leo was curled up in a large armchair next to her bed, finally exhausted into a deep sleep. His small hand grasping the uninjured side of Luna's tunic. The heavy door swung open, and Beta Thorn entered, looking grave. "Your Majesty." The council has convened an emergency session. Lady Seraphina has formally petitioned the elders. Cassian's jaw ticked. On what grounds? She argues that the spire's security is compromised, and that the heir is a prime target because you are distracted. Thorn replied, his eyes flickering briefly to Luna before returning to the floor. She insists that the Omega is a liability, causing a lapse in your judgment. The Southern Lords are backing her. They are demanding a public test of the heir's stability at the upcoming lunar banquet. Luna's breath hitched. Hundreds of pack leaders gathered to swear fealty. It was loud, chaotic, and aggressively dominated by alpha politics. It was the absolute worst environment for a child suffering from sensory overload. If Leo fails to present himself as a stable, commanding heir, Thorn continued quietly, they will invoke the right of challenge. They will claim your bloodline is unstable. Cassian, they dare threaten my son to get to my throne. Cassian's voice dropped to a lethal whisper. The glass vials on the physician's tray, vibrating from the sheer force of his suppressed anger, they see weakness. Luna said softly from the bed. Both men looked at her. Seraphina doesn't care about the boy. She cares about proving that she is the necessary solution to your problems. Luna continued. Carefully sitting up, she winced slightly, but kept her gaze steady on Cassian. She wants to force you to marry her to secure the southern armies and stabilize your reign. If Leo breaks down at the banquet, she will offer herself as the strict alpha mother he needs. Cassian crossed the room in 3 long strides, stopping right at the edge of her bed. He is not ready for a public banquet. The noise, the sense, the sheer volume of predators in one room, it will undo all the progress you've made with him. Then we prepare him, Luna said. A fierce, protective glint in her silver eyes. We have 2 weeks. I can teach him how to anchor himself. Later that night, the infirmary was quiet. Leo had been moved to his bed, and Cassian had ordered the guards to leave them alone. He sat in the chair Leo had vacated, pouring 2 glasses of amber liquid from a crystal decanter he'd brought down from his private study. He handed one to Luna, his large, calloused fingers briefly brushing against hers. A jolt of electricity arced between them. Undeniable and heavy. You should not have thrown yourself in front of that blade, Cassian said, his voice a low, rough murmur. The firelight played across the harsh angles of his face, softening the ruthless king into a weary man. He's a child. It was instinct, Luna replied, taking a small sip of the burning liquid. It is not the instinct of an Omega to protect an alpha heir from an armed assassin. Cassian countered. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, staring down into his glass. My mate, Alara, she was an alpha, a fierce warrior, but she was betrayed by her own personal guard, someone she trusted implicitly. They cornered her during a patrol. I was miles away. Luna stayed perfectly still, recognizing the immense weight of the confession. The Alpha King did not share his grief. To do so was to bleed in shark-infested waters. Since then, I have trusted no one, Cassian admitted, finally looking up to meet her eyes. The raw vulnerability in his golden gaze was staggering. I built this spire into a fortress. I ruled through absolute fear because it was the only way I could ensure Leo's survival. And yet, the greatest protection he has found in 3 years is a frail archivist with an apple and a piece of charcoal. Power isn't just about forcing the world into submission. Cassian, Luna said, using his name softly in the quiet intimacy of the room. Sometimes, It's about choosing who you are willing to bleed for. Cassian's eyes darkened, dropping briefly to her lips before flicking back to her eyes. The air between them thickened. The scent of his pine and ozone mixed intoxicatingly with her lavender. He reached out, his thumb gently tracing the uninjured curve of her collarbone. "You are a very dangerous woman, Luna," he whispered, the proximity making her heart hammer against her ribs. "I told you." She smiled, breathless and daring. He bite back. The next 2 weeks were a grueling test of endurance. Engineered entirely by a fragile Omega in an oversized sweater, Luna transformed the royal training grounds into a controlled theater of chaos. If Leo was going to survive the lunar banquet, he needed to learn how to exist within a hurricane without letting the wind tear him apart. She started small, 2 guards clashing wooden training swords 50 feet away, while Leo tried to complete a puzzle. When the boy whimpered and covered his ears, Luna didn't stop the noise. Instead, she knelt beside him, placing a small, smooth piece of black obsidian in his left hand and a milky white moonstone in his right. "The black stone is your father," Luna murmured, her voice a steady anchor beneath the sharp cracks of wood. "It's the earth. It's heavy, and it doesn't move, no matter how hard the wind blows." Leo squeezed the obsidian, his small chest heaving. "The white stone is me," she continued, her thumb brushing a stray curl from his forehead. "It's the water. It yields. It flows. But it always finds a way through. When the noise gets too loud, Leo, you don't fight it. You feel the stones. You find the earth. And you find the water." Cassian watched from the shaded colonnade, his heart a tight, aching knot in his chest. He was an alpha king. His instinct was to eliminate the source of his cub's distress. It took every ounce of his formidable willpower to remain still, trusting the Omega, who had somehow woven herself into the very fabric of his family. By the second week, Luna had escalated the training. She brought in a dozen off-duty soldiers, instructing them to talk loudly, laugh, and release mild bursts of territorial pheromones. It was a suffocating cacophony of sound and scent. Leo sat on a stone bench in the center of the yard, his eyes squeezed shut, a low warning growl building in his throat. His small hands were buried deep in his pockets, gripping the stones so tightly his knuckles were white. From the upper balcony, Lady Serafina watched the display, her lips curled into a disdainful sneer. Beside her stood Lord Melicor, one of her father's fiercest generals. "It's pathetic," Serafina he said, adjusting her silk shawl. The heir to the northern packs, clutching rocks like a frightened peasant. "He's weak, Melicor, and Cassian is blinded by that little gray mouse. The boy is unstable." Melicor agreed, his voice a gravelly rumble. "If he shatters at the banquet, the council will have no choice but to demand a stronger, maternal figure to guide him. We just need to ensure the pressure is adequate." "Say to it," Serafina commanded, her eyes flashing with ruthless ambition. "Bring the concentrated pheromone vials from the southern apothecaries. When the toast is called, I want the air so thick with alpha dominance that even Cassian will struggle to breathe." Down in the courtyard, Leo's growl hitched. He opened his eyes, amber irises wide with panic. The simulated crowd was closing in, the noise overlapping, the sense twisting into an oppressive knot. He looked wildly for Luna, but she had purposely stepped behind a stone pillar, forcing him to stand alone. Cassian stepped forward, unable to take it anymore. But before he could intervene, Leo took a sharp, gasping breath. The boy pulled his hands from his pockets. He didn't cover his ears. He didn't scream. He looked down at the black obsidian in his palm. Then, he looked up, his gaze finding his father in the shadows of the colonnade. Leo squared his small shoulders, exhaled a long, steady breath, and the feral gold in his eyes slowly faded back to a warm, intelligent amber. Behind the pillar, Luna leaned her head against the cool stone and smiled. Though her hands were shaking, they were as ready as they would ever be. Later that evening, in the quiet dimness of the royal study, Cassian poured a single glass of whiskey. He didn't drink it. He simply stared at the amber liquid, listening to the soft rustle of Luna organizing a stack of books on the far desk. "You're afraid," Luna said softly, not looking up from the leather bindings. "I have led men into slaughters where the rivers ran black with blood, and I did not blink," Cassian replied, his voice heavy. "But the thought of tomorrow night makes my blood run cold." Luna stopped. She crossed the room, stopping just a foot away from the massive Alpha King. "He knows how to find the shore now. Cassian, you have to let him swim." Cassian looked down at her. The proximity was intoxicating. He reached out, his large hand gently cupping the side of her face. His thumb brushed along her cheekbone. A startlingly tender gesture from a man known only for his brutality. "And what of my shore?" "Luna," he whispered, his golden eyes burning with sudden, intense heat. "Where do I look when the storm breaks?" Luna's breath hitched, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs. She leaned fractionally into his touch, her silver eyes locking with his. "You don't need a shore, my king. You are the storm." The great hall of the obsidian spire was a cavern of suffocating grandeur. Thousands of black iron chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceiling, casting harsh, flickering light over the massive oak tables. 300 alpha lords and pack leaders from across the territories had gathered. Their combined presence created an atmosphere so thick with dominance and aggression. It felt like walking through deep water. Protocol dictated that Cassian and Leo sit at the raised high table, flanked by the senior council members and Lady Serafina, who had secured the seat of honor as the southern representative. Luna, as an Omega, was not permitted to sit. She was relegated to the deep shadows behind the high table, forced to stand among the servants and cupbearers. She wore a simple, dark dress, practically invisible against the obsidian walls. But her silver eyes never left the small, tense figure of the prince. The feast was a chaotic symphony of clashing goblets, booming laughter, and the tearing of roasted meats. Every time a lord slammed his fist on the table in agreement. Leo flinched. The boy was dressed in a miniature version of his father's formal attire, black velvet and silver armor, but he looked terrifyingly small. For the first hour, Leo held his own. He kept one hand in his pocket, clutching the stones Luna had given him. Cassian remained rigidly close, radiating a subtle protective aura to shield his son as best he could without drawing the council's ire. Then, the final course was cleared, and Beta Thorn struck a ceremonial gong. The deafening reverberation silenced the hall. It was time for the toast of fealty, the moment the heir was required to stand and formally accept the loyalty of the Pax. Lady Serafina stood, raising a goblet of crimson wine. She wore a gown of spun gold, looking every inch the queen she believed she was destined to be. To the Alpha King, Serafina projected her voice across the silent hall. "And to the young prince may he show the strength of the bloodline that binds us all." It was the signal from the far corners of the hall. Lord Malacor's men discreetly crushed the glass vials hidden in their palms. Instantly, an overwhelming wave of concentrated, aggressive alpha pheromones flooded the ventilation drafts. It hit the floor like a physical shock wave. Several lesser alphas in the crowd choked, their eyes watering as the synthetic dominance forced them into submission. But for Leo, whose senses were unshielded and raw, it was a biological bomb. The boy dropped his silver goblet. It clattered against the stone floor. The sound magnified 100 times in his mind. He gasped, grabbing his throat as if he were suffocating. The air was burning him. The overlapping scents of 300 predators suddenly felt like a physical attack. A low, feral growl, the terrible sound of an animal backed into a corner, tore from his small chest. His amber eyes blew out into wide, terrifying rings of gold. He began to shake violently, his claws extending, tearing through the fine velvet of his trousers. "Look at him," Lord Malachor sneered loudly from the second table, his voice carrying perfectly in the sudden silence. "The air is feral. He cannot even withstand a simple toast." The council erupted into murmurs of shock and disdain. Cassian surged out of his chair, reaching for his son. But Beta Thorn desperately grabbed the king's arm. "Sire, no, if you coddle him now in front of the southern lords, they will invoke the right. He must stand alone. He is drowning," Cassian roared, shaking Thorn off. But the hesitation had cost him a vital second. Leo was hyperventilating, entirely lost in the red haze of sensory overload. He bared his teeth at a servant who took a step too close, a full, violent snap that sent the man scrambling backward. The court gasped. The prince was breaking. Serafina stepped smoothly toward the boy, her own heavy, rose-scented pheromones flaring to force him down into submission. "Hush now, little beast," she said coldly, raising a hand as if to strike him back into line. "Your weakness shames your father. Do not touch him." The voice did not belong to the king. It was melodic, yet it carried the piercing, unmistakable force of absolute command. From the shadows behind the high table, Luna stepped into the harsh, flickering light. A collective gasp echoed through the great hall. "An Omega had broken protocol," spoken out of turn, and commanded a highborn alpha. It was grounds for immediate imprisonment, if not death. Serafina froze, her hand still raised, her face twisting into a mask of pure fury. "You dare, guards. Seize this creature." 2 armored guards stepped forward. But before they could cross the dais, a wave of scent washed over the high table. It wasn't the suffocating synthetic dominance of the shattered vials. It was the scent of blooming lavender and petrichor, thick, heavy, and furiously protective. It was an Omega's distress scent, twisted by a maternal instinct, so powerful it forced the guards to instinctively lower their weapons. Luna ignored Serafina. She ignored the 300 Alpha Lords, staring at her. She walked directly to the edge of the high table, her silver eyes locked onto the violently shaking prince. "Leo," she called out, her voice cutting through the synthetic haze like a blade of pure silver. The boy's head snapped toward her. He was still growling, lost in the feral panic, his small body ready to attack anything that moved. Luna didn't reach for him. She didn't try to pull him into a hug. She simply raised her right hand and held up the pale, milky moonstone. "Find the water," Luna whispered, even over the murmurs of the crowd. The boy heard her. Leo stared at the stone. His chest heaved. He looked at Luna's calm, unwavering face. And then he looked up at Cassian. who was standing tall, a mountain of dark obsidian, his golden eyes radiating pure, unshakable belief in his son. Slowly, agonizingly, Leo shoved his hand into his pocket. His small, clawed fingers wrapped around the black stone hidden in his velvet trousers. The great hall held its breath. Leo closed his eyes. He took one shuddering breath, then another. The feral growl stuttered, caught in his throat, and finally died away. His small fists unclenched. The sharp, extended claws retracted back into his fingertips. When Leo opened his eyes, the blown-out gold had receded. He looked at Serafina, who was staring at him in utter disbelief. The boy stood up straight, brushing off his velvet tunic with a small dew-dyed, dignified gesture. He turned to face the vast sea of Alpha Lords. "I am Prince Leo." The boy spoke. His voice was small, but it was clear, steady, and entirely lucid. It was the first time the court had heard him speak in 3 years. He turned his amber gaze to Serafina. "Step back from me. Lady Serafina, you smell like poison." The hall erupted not in anger, but in a thunderous roar of astonishment and fierce approval. The boy hadn't broken. He had conquered the frenzy. Cassian didn't wait for the noise to die down. He moved with terrifying speed, his hand snapping out to wrap around Serafina's wrist before she could retreat. "Poison," Cassian rumbled, his voice vibrating the very stones beneath their feet. He inhaled deeply, his advanced senses finally isolating the chemical taint beneath her heavy rose perfume. "Synthetic dominance. You dared to unleash a biological weapon against my son in my own hall. Cassian, please. It was a test." Serafina stammered, all her haughty arrogance evaporating as the Alpha King's lethal intent washed over her. "You are banished from the Northern Territories," Cassian declared. "If you or Lord Malachor step foot across my borders again, I will not ask for your surrender. I will simply take your heads. Guards, remove them." As Serafina and her conspirators were dragged from the hall amidst the jeers of the Northern Lords, Cassian turned his back on the crowd. He looked down at Leo, pride swelling so massively in his chest, he thought his ribs might crack. He rested a heavy hand on the boy's shoulder, a silent promise of eternal protection. Then, the Alpha King turned to the shadows. Luna stood quietly, the adrenaline fading, leaving her trembling slightly in her modest dress. She had broken the highest laws of the pack. She was waiting for her punishment. Cassian walked toward her, ignoring the murmurs that flared up again among the council. He didn't stop until he was inches from her, slowly, deliberately, in front of the entire ruling body of the Northern Packs. The Alpha King bowed his head to the Omega. He reached out, taking her small, scarred hand in his massive one, and pressed a deep, lingering kiss to her knuckles. "You told me once that you bite back," Cassian murmured, his golden eyes filled with a terrifying, beautiful devotion. "I see now you have teeth enough for the both of us." He didn't let go of her hand. Instead, Cassian gently pulled Luna up onto the dais, leading her past the empty chair Serafina had vacated, and placed her firmly at his right side. He looked out over his kingdom, his son anchored to the earth, his mate grounded in the water. For the first time in his reign, the Alpha King smiled. The obsidian spire, once a fortress of cold isolation, slowly transformed into a true home. Leo never lost his fierce protective edge, but with Luna's steady guidance and Cassian's unwavering support, the feral cub grew into a brilliant, formidable prince who ruled with empathy rather than terror. Cassian and Luna proved that true power doesn't come from biology or rank, but from the courage to stand in the storm and the wisdom to offer a gentle hand when the world expects a closed fist. 5. Takeaway points. Point 1. True strength doesn't always come from force. It comes from understanding what someone truly needs. When Leo clung to Luna's sleeve, terrified and drowning in a room full of aggressive alphas, she didn't try to overpower him. She offered him an apple, spoke to him like an ordinary child, and gave him the one thing no one else had: calm, patient presence. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stay soft when the world is screaming. Point 2. The people who study in silence often see what the powerful miss. Luna spent 10 hours a day in the archives, translating dead languages and piecing together centuries-old texts about feral alpha heirs. She wasn't looking for glory. She was searching for answers. And when the royal physicians failed, her relentless curiosity gave her the method to reach a child everyone else had given up on. Knowledge becomes power when you use it to heal, not to dominate. Point 3. Fear doesn't mean you're broken. It means you're overwhelmed and need a way to anchor yourself. Luna didn't try to stop Leo's anger or force him to behave. Instead, she handed him 2 stones, black obsidian for his father, the earth that doesn't move, and white moonstone for her, the water that flows and finds a way through. She taught him that surviving the storm isn't about fighting it, it's about finding something steady to hold on to when everything else is chaos. Point 4. Real protection isn't transactional, it's instinctive, even when it costs you everything. When the assassin's blade came down toward Leo in the atrium, Luna didn't hesitate. She threw herself forward, shoved the boy into the thorn roses, and took the hit across her shoulder without a second thought. She didn't do it for status, compensation, or recognition. She did it because a frightened child needed someone willing to bleed for him. And that's what love looks like when it's real. Point 5. The most powerful act of leadership is choosing who you're willing to stand beside, even when the world tells you they're beneath you. When Luna broke protocol and commanded Lady Seraphina in front of 300 Alpha Lords, she risked execution. But Cassian didn't punish her. He bowed his head to her, kissed her hand, and placed her at his right side. He showed his entire kingdom that true power isn't about enforcing hierarchy, it's about recognizing worth, no matter where it comes from.